Although Code Geass is still well regarded by many people, I see a lot more hate for it in recent years than I saw before, and I never really understood this personally. There are things about the show that I don't like, but there's things I don't like in all my favorite shows, and despite its flaws, I really do think its strengths make up for them. So after watching it for the third time recently, I thought it would be a good time to finally do a video on why I love it so much. I'll remain mostly spoiler free in case you haven't seen the show yet, but when I do discuss spoilers, I'll make sure to drop a warning. I've always really liked the cast of Code Geass. It's one of few shows I can think of where almost every character matters to some extent. There's so many likable and memorable characters that add something to the plot, whether it's directly impacting the main story or building upon the themes and setting. There are so many great characters that I couldn't possibly cover them all in this video, so I just wanted to mention two of the more important ones, Lelouch and Cece. Lelouch is really the perfect main character for a show like this, being extremely over the top while still showing a lot of complexity. You gradually gain a better understanding of his ideals and watch them constantly be challenged throughout the show. It's also endlessly entertaining to see how he thinks his way out of dangerous situations, even if a few of the solutions were a bit silly. Cece isn't quite as interesting, but is by far one of the most likable characters for me. She's not only fun to watch, but has amazing chemistry with Lelouch. There's also a lot of mystery around her that was very interesting to watch unfold in the second season. Even some of the less likable characters in Code Geass, I still think have important roles in the story. One of the characters I see the most hate for is Suzaku, which I kind of understand but don't think is completely deserved. He's not the most likable character, but he is far from being a badly written one. His ideals may be flawed, but they're actually pretty understandable when you actually consider all the horrible things the Black Knights have caused. But we do see a more hypocritical side of Suzaku. Especially in the second season, we see him go against certain ideals which he claimed to uphold before, something that many characters call him out on. He is a deeply flawed person, and the show is very much aware of this. On the other hand, one character in the show who completely deserves the hate they get is Nina, who is one of my least favorite characters of any story I've seen. She's an obnoxious racist that does not have a single redeemable personality trait. But even her character was important due to the technological advancements she brings and expanding upon the themes of racism. Although I do have an issue with how the show depicts her, as although the disgusting aspects of her character aren't glorified, it felt like the show was trying to make me sympathize with her in certain scenes. Code Geass is in general very good at making you feel sympathy for deeply flawed people, but Nina is a rare example of someone so awful that any attempts to depict her as more complex always fell flat for me. But she's the only character in Code Geass that I genuinely hated. There's some other characters I disliked, but none that are nearly as irritating or relevant to the plot. Although it does have its issues, I absolutely love the story of Code Geass. It's extremely entertaining and has so much going on in almost every episode, not only because of the large cast of characters that affect each other directly and indirectly, but because of all the themes it tackles involving war, discrimination, and morality. It's a really dense show that I appreciate new things about the more I revisit it, whether it's a character I liked more or a setup I noticed for a later plot point. It makes Code Geass one of the most fun shows to rewatch for me. It's also a series that is constantly balancing different tones, going from being upbeat and silly in one scene to dark and violent in another. It's able to tell a genuinely compelling story while still being able to have fun when it wants to. This especially shows in the juxtaposition between the scenes at Lelouch's high school and the Black Knight's conflict with Britannia. Not only does it show the dissonance between the lives of Britannians and Elevens, but allows for more lighthearted and goofy episodes without feeling too jarring. But this does lead into one of my few issues with the show, as although I generally like the balancing of tones, it is also made for some of the show's worst episodes, which are both much goofier than most of the show and deliver very little plot development. The most infamous example of this is the episode where Lelouch's helmet gets stolen by a cat, but there are other episodes that I feel are just as bad, such as the hat stealing episode from season 2. But there is some examples of the show balancing silly high school moments and important plot progression genuinely well, one of these being season 1 episode 21, or the Student Festival. Not only is it a fun episode with plenty of important character moments, but it's where we see Euphemia give a very important announcement. I won't spoil what she says here, but it's by far one of the show's biggest turning points. But as a whole, Code Geass isn't always able to balance these tones well, so I think it's a valid criticism. But whenever I see people talk about this issue, they're usually mentioned to explain why the show isn't good or fatally flawed. I've never really understood this when these episodes feel so inconsequential to the actual plot. There's nothing in them that would make the plot or characters less interesting. They may not be the best, but I just can't agree that they overshadow everything the show does great. This is where the spoiler-free part of the video ends, as there's a few things that I really want to give my thoughts on but can't really talk about without spoiling. So if you haven't seen the show yet and don't want to get spoiled, I'd recommend clicking off. I was surprised to learn that some people don't like the story arc focusing on Mao. I thought it was really good personally. I thought Mao created a lot of tension with his sadistic methods and powerful ability to read minds. His character also foreshadows how dangerous Geass can be when it gets out of control. My only real issue with this arc is the last episode, which in my opinion is the worst episode of the show. Episode 15 gave a perfectly satisfying conclusion to this arc, with Lelouch rescuing CC and commanding multiple policemen to shoot Mao, assumedly killing him. But in the very next episode, it reveals that Mao survived, with the explanation being that Lelouch told the police to shoot Mao, but not kill him. It's so much of a dumb explanation that it's unintentionally hilarious. Mao then forces Lelouch to play an impossible chess game for Nunnally's life. I don't hate the idea of this, since it once again shows the sadistic ways Mao uses his power, but the way it's resolved was really dumb. The show revealing that before confronting Mao, Lelouch told Suzaku his plan to save Nunnally, then used the Geass on himself via reflection to erase his own memory, making it so Mao would have no idea what he's planning. Lelouch being able to use the Geass on himself just brings up so many questions about how the Geass works, none of which the show will ever elaborate on. It once again makes this episode feel like it shouldn't have existed. The only vital development we get is Mao revealing that Suzaku killed his own father after reading his mind. It's a very important scene for Suzaku's character that's really the only point of bringing Mao back. This whole episode was just a mess. While the show's weakest episodes tend to be pretty inconsequential, this one suffered from some really questionable writing choices that made this otherwise compelling storyline end in the most underwhelming way. I will stand by the other 2 episodes of this arc being great, but I cannot defend this one. By far the part of Code Geass that I've seen the most polarizing reactions for is episode 22, with some people considering it one of the show's best episodes, and others feeling that it was a very contrived way to create more conflict. While Lelouch accidentally commanding Yuffie to start murdering the Japanese was very convenient, I think the setup for the scene is a lot better than many people give it credit for. For one thing, the idea of Geass possibly malfunctioning was already set up. After having his first confrontation with Mao, CC tells Lelouch that the more he uses his Geass, the more powerful and dangerous it will become. As for Lelouch's poorly timed joke, it was completely completely in character for him to say that line at that specific moment, essentially bragging about his power after Euphemia said she doesn't believe him. It's one of many examples of his ego leading to terrible consequences. But besides all of this, the show makes it very clear that however Euphemia's plan for the Japanese went, would have massive ramifications on the world of Code Geass. Euphemia's plan to give the Japanese independence unintentionally backs Lelouch into a corner. If the Black Knights choose to ally with Euphemia, then they might not be able to achieve independence on their own terms. But if they refuse, it would cause them to lose public support. This difficult situation could lead to the Black Knights falling apart, and Lelouch never achieving his goal of revenge against Britannia. It was clear from the start that this situation wasn't going to end well. It just happened that a simple mistake led to one of the worst possible outcomes. It may not be a perfect scene, but I felt the show did enough to justify it and still make it very effective. I see a lot of people consider the second season worse than the first, which I can partially understand, as I thought the first half of season 2 was a bit of a mixed bag. I like the intentionally confusing way it starts, watching Lelouch maintain his role as Zero while avoiding suspicion, and there was some really great action. But it also had some of my least favorite episodes of the show, and the storyline involving the Chinese Federation wasn't that interesting in my opinion. While I mostly liked the first half, I can acknowledge that it's very flawed. But in my opinion, it's more than made up for by how great the second half is. Everything from episode 13 on is, in my opinion, the show at its best. It's not only extremely entertaining with amazing scenes happening every episode, but there's so many great reveals and payoffs that the show has gradually been building up to. There were maybe some reveals that could have been hinted at more, like Jeremiah revealing his motives or Lelouch learning the truth about his mother's death. But even these seem minor to how much I enjoyed the second half. This section of the show is for me what took Code Geass from a great show to one of my all-time favorites. And no episode cemented this more for me than the one episode of the show that gets almost universal praise, the series finale. I've been having a lot of trouble writing this part of the video due to how strongly I feel about the finale and not being sure if I could ever do it justice, but I'm going to try anyway. Code Geass, in my opinion, has one of the best endings to any story I've seen, and is by far my favorite part about Code Geass. Not to say that the rest of the show is anything less than great, but the last episode is on another level entirely, bringing almost every character arc to a satisfying conclusion, and delivering one of the most powerful plot twists I've ever seen. For the last few episodes, Lelouch's actions have seemed very questionable. Now that he's finally gotten revenge on his father, he's now seeking to gain complete control over the Britannian Empire, willing to resort to whatever means to do so. It would almost seem as if he's too far gone in certain scenes, yet there's plenty of moments of him showing hesitation or remorse. He's clearly putting on some facade in front of most people, which only adds to the question of why he's doing any of this, and it's only in the final few minutes of the show that it's revealed. By conquering the Britannian Empire and intentionally turning everyone against him, he has essentially united everyone in their hatred of him, and after doing so, he would arrange his own death at the hands of Suzaku, ultimately bringing peace to the world and those he cares about. As compelling as a character Lelouch is, the show has made it very clear how much he is driven by selfishness. So to see him give his life in this act of selflessness was so tragic, yet the perfect way to resolve his character. In an episode that already wraps up storylines so well, the conclusion of Lelouch's story is by far the most powerful. This is, in my opinion, as close to a perfect ending as you can get. not only for how satisfying yet devastating it is, but how much better it makes this already great show in retrospect. You can see how almost every character arc, storyline, and theme was in some way building up to this conclusion. It is a genuinely phenomenal ending in every way, deserving every bit of praise it gets and more. Code Geass, if you couldn't already tell, is one of my favorite shows of all time. I find that I often have trouble finding things to talk about when writing videos, yet I find it so easy to talk about Code Geass. It's a show that I love so much for so many reasons, and I don't think that I'll ever get bored of it. Thanks for watching this video. I had a lot of fun rewatching the show and putting this video together, so please let me know how you thought about it in the comments. Also, I have a lot of videos I'm planning on making in the distant future, so subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. Anyways, that's about it. Thanks for watching.